Hey everybody, welcome back to the Time Pass podcast. This is your host, Ashika. Thank you so much for joining me today, you guys. If you haven't done so already, please like me on Facebook at Time Pass Podcast. Follow me on Instagram at TimePass_podcast. And check out the YouTube channel where you can watch all the episodes of the Time Pass podcast. If you are an auditory listener, wherever you are tuning into podcasts, please make sure that you are followed, or subscribed on your listening platform of choice. Now, real quick, you guys, before I get into the meat of the episode today, I have been teasing you guys since last November about some big news coming up, and I did announce it on my Instagram back in January. But if you do not follow me on social media, number one, get out your phone, follow me now, please. And number two, I would like to share with you that I am joining the team at Ruckus Avenue Radio, part of Dash Radio. So now you will also be able to hear the podcast on Ruckus Avenue Radio. It is the #1 South Asian radio network with over 9 million listeners a month. Yikes! I am so excited. Follow me on Instagram to stay up to date as to when the show will premiere. It's literally supposed to premiere this winter, so it could be any day now. Anyway, that was exciting news. But today, I don't have something so exciting to talk about. I want to talk about grief. Unfortunately, earlier this week, actually on Valentine's Day, I had a death in the family. It was a sudden death and really unexpected, and I have a lot of family who are really going through it and struggling to come to terms with this loss, myself included. The funeral's in a couple days, so I will be headed home down to Southern California to attend that funeral. But you know, I've done an episode on dealing with death before, and I think that was more, I think it was season 1 or season 2, and it was more early in season 2 maybe, but it was more about just like how we handled death. But as I've been processing this death in my family over the last few days, I started wondering, you know, we grieve many things, right? And we can grieve any sort of loss. And so grieving a death, obviously that's a huge loss. It's the loss of a person. But we can also grieve the loss of a person who's still alive, like a relationship. And so I wanted to kind of talk about the stages of grief a little bit and then see how they relate to both losing a loved one and losing a loved one in a relationship. So we're going to talk about that a little bit, and I want to kind of see how it's similar. And then, you know, I'm going to bring it full circle, and I want to see how they're different, because they're different in some very big ways. I did a lot of research and a lot of reading up on grief for this episode, you guys. There's 2 articles in particular that I am using. They are linked in the show notes on timepasspodcast.com. So if you would like to check out my sources or get more in depth on either of these pieces that I'm going to pull from to talk about grief today, please visit the website and check them out. All right, you guys, so let's start with the 5 stages of grief, right? So the 5 stages of grief, believe it or not, was a book that was put out a long time ago by Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross and David Kessler. And she was the one who introduced the concept of the 5 stages of grief. And the only thing that I will say, and I know this from experience, and it was also mentioned in the article, and it's something to keep in mind when we talk about the 5 stages of grief, grief is not, like, there's no timeline. It's not linear. So you literally could be in denial and then angry and then acceptance and then back into denial at any state and any point in time. So please keep that in mind. if you are dealing with grief, or if you know someone who's dealing with grief and you're trying to help them through it. So, having said that, let's talk about the first stage of grief, which is denial. What this article says actually is that when we are in denial, pertaining to death, okay, so this first article is strictly pertaining to death, and then I'm going to bring in the relationship comparison. So when we are in denial with death, we're not registering the pain and the shock, and there's a bit of a disbelief about what happened. And it's like with death, sometimes when you're in denial, you try to convince yourself that that person isn't dead. Like, hey, they're on vacation. Hey, they're at work. Hey, they've just gone somewhere. They're going to come walking in through that door any second. How many times have we heard that? When people are grieving and when you lose someone, a lot of times you will hear somebody say, I just keep looking and waiting for them to walk in through that door. It's kind of a little bit of denial, right? You're just like, I'm just hoping that they're going to walk back in through that door. Take that statement and apply it to relationships. How often in the beginning, when we first break up with someone or lose a connection, do we keep hoping that they're going to walk back into our life? That they're going to change their mind, that they're going to realize how amazing we are, and they can't live without us, and they're going to come strolling back into our life. It's kind of the relationship side of denial, right? Is when we're sitting there and we're like, oh, they'll be back. They're going to come back. They can't. Like, they're going to come back. They're going to come back. They're going to realize what they had, and they're going to come crawling back. It'll be fine. Unfortunately, that is a bit of denial. Now, that's different than when I say they always come back, because somehow when you date, they do always come back, but that's different. That's me being confident that some F-boy that I dated a long time ago or talked to a long time ago is at some point, one way or another, going to try to come back into my life. And that has been proven several times over. But this is different. This is like a breakup and it's over, but you keep hoping, you keep thinking, you keep dreaming that this person is going to change their mind, waltz back into your life. Anger. Again, this is very natural, and we could be, if we're dealing with death, we could be angry because this person died. Sometimes people are angry at the person, like, how dare you die and leave me here? Sometimes they're angry at the situation. They get angry at their God. They get angry at the universe. It's like what the article basically says is anger is pain's bodyguard, and it's how we express pain. It's through anger. And it is something that people have to go through, and anger can be healthy to help deal with grief. And it can sort of anchor you and give some structure. It gives some feeling. That's how I want to describe it. The article describes it as giving structure, but I want to say when I get angry or have gotten angry in the past when dealing with death, I basically go from a place of numbness, of like, I don't know how to feel, to a place of anger. And it's almost like when somebody dies, you kind of, if it's a deep connected bond with somebody and they pass away, it's almost like a part of you dies with them. And I've had it before where I've kind of felt like numb, just like, what am I doing? But then when you get anger, it's healthy because it's like you're feeling again. It almost brings you back to life a little bit because you can feel. And so I think that is really important. I think that's what the article was trying to say when they were referring to it as structure. I refer to it as feeling again. And a lot of times that anger can be displaced, right? I'm not even gonna lie. I know this about myself. I try really hard to work on it, but when there is something that I'm upset about, I lash out. And unfortunately, if you know me and you know me well, I tend to lash out at the people that are closest to me. So I try really hard to not do that, but it's almost like because somebody is really close to me and knows me really well, I feel safer being my vulnerable self around them, which includes anger. Anger is an emotion, and showing emotion is showing vulnerability. And because somebody is close to me, I can trust them with my vulnerability. I know, that's horrible, right? I know, it's such a fucked up logic. I know this about myself. Gosh, I just did this at the end of last year. Like, I was really frustrated over some things, and I found myself, like, getting angry. Like, I have a short fuse. I can have a short fuse, y'all. I can have a really short fuse sometimes. Doesn't seem like it. I'm all nice and sweet. I can have a really short fuse, but I hold it in. I hold it in, and I only show those vulnerabilities of myself, those emotions, in front of people who I feel really close to, and I feel like they can handle it. So unfortunately, if you're really close to me, I apologize if I've ever lashed out at you. But for the most part, I really do, I'm aware of it, so I really do hone it and try to control it. Anyway, going back to this. So it can be anything that sets somebody off. It can be somebody bringing the wrong dish to a potluck. It could be somebody who cuts you off in the morning, and you're just like, all of a sudden you're so angry at that person, and you're like blowing up, and you have no idea why you're so angry at that person. But you know that you're angry, and that anger needs to come out. So unfortunately, what lies behind the feelings of anger is feelings of, or are feelings of hopelessness and powerlessness. And what we do by blaming other people or assuming guilt is, it's an illusion of control, and a way for us to express our frustration. The third stage of grief, bargaining. So this one, what the article says here is it stems from guilt, and it basically involves like if only statements. Like, if only I would have done this before this person died. If only they wouldn't have gone to work today. If only they wouldn't have done this. If only, it's just a bunch of like what could have been. You start thinking of like that, like what could have been. And you imagine these scenarios of how differently things could have played out. It's like, if this, then that sort of thing, right? And it's, it's hard to realize that sometimes bad things happen to good people, and it's not what we do that has any effect on it. So bad things can still happen to you regardless of your behaviors or your efforts to not have bad things happen to you. Death, unfortunately, is something that is kind of out of your control. So trying to relate bargaining, and anger. I forgot to relate anger. So let's backtrack. So let's go back to trying to relate anger to the death of a relationship. So I would say anger, we have this, right? When we're dealing with a loved one, a breakup, right? We get to the point where we're angry. We start talking crap about them. We start bad-mouthing them. It's whatever we need to do to tell ourselves, like, that this person is not good for me. We start, like, well, this person, this is what I do. I try to focus on the things that maybe I didn't like about that person. Or, like, like, girls do this a lot when we say things like, medium ugly. When you find somebody medium ugly, and you're like, he was medium ugly, and I can't believe I gave him a chance, and then this is how he treats me. Like, you try to find the little faults and the little flaws that you can be angry about so that you can process this and get over it. So bargaining, I feel like, when dealing with the loss of a breakup, is quite similar. But I think sometimes bargaining, a lot of times what ends up happening when we bargain is we start blaming ourselves. And it's a similar situation. So I think in death, it's like, if only I had said, stay home today, or if only he hadn't gone to the grocery store before he came home, right? When you're dealing with bargaining in the stage of grief with a relationship, I think a lot of times we blame ourselves a lot more. There's a lot more guilt that's placed on ourselves, and a lot of our bargaining statements when it comes to dealing with the loss in a relationship is like, if only I would have put in more effort. If only I would have called more. If only I would have texted more. If only I would have texted less. It's like we microscopically look at our own actions and bargain in our head with those because we start to blame ourselves for the loss of this connection. So I think that is a big difference with how we bargain between the loss of a death of a loved one and the loss of a relationship. Because yes, when you're bargaining with a death, you may still have those guilty statements, but I think you can also have more generalized statements. A lot of times when you're bargaining and dealing with the loss of a relationship, someone's still living, we tend to blame ourselves and we're bargaining with ourselves and our own actions. Okay, the fourth stage, depression. So dealing with a death, it's hard. I think it's like a very acute, very specific sadness and loss that is affecting your life. And oftentimes it feels like it's never going to stop and it's going to go on for forever. And what ends up happening is we're depressed. We don't get out of bed. We don't do things that make us happy. We don't take care of ourselves. We don't take care of our homes. We don't work out. We don't want to be social. We don't want to eat. God, I am so guilty of this. I completely lose my appetite when I'm sad over something. And it really, a lot of times, I'm very fortunate that I have people that are close to me in my life who may know these things about me or make it a point to know these things about me or make it a point to just ask me if I've eaten. And so they kind of push me to do that. I can say this last time that I was kind of in a bad place, I had my boss. And I think he just always cares. He wants to make sure that I take care of myself. So he's like, did you eat? Did you have lunch? Did you, what, he will always ask me, to make sure that I'm taking care of myself. But then also, my best friend, Fabian, he kind of knows. And so he'll be like, did you eat anything? Get up and go eat something. Even if you eat a little, just eat something. There's been times where he's, brought food over in the past when I was dealing with something. So I'm fortunate that I have people like that in my life that have helped me. And so that's what, depression looks like. You don't want to do anything. You don't want to go anywhere. You don't want to be social. You don't want to get dressed. You don't want to, I don't know. I have those days. I have those days even when I'm not depressed. When I just want to rest. Where I'll wake up and I'll shower, and if I don't like have anything to do, I will wake up, I will shower, I'll do my skincare routine, no makeup, and just like comb my hair and put on like a clean pair of pajamas and just know that I'm just gonna be in my pajamas all day and read a book. Like, I love doing that. I can also do that though when I'm depressed, and maybe like it's not as well put together as that other scenario, but that can happen. Oftentimes it's hard to pull yourself out of the depression stage, and I think at this point, what the article brings up at this point, and when you're dealing with death, sometimes people will still have that fantasy in their head that the person that they lost is going to come back, that they're on vacation, and they can have that thing still. And when they get into that deep depression, it's kind of them realizing that, oh shit, I'm awake now, and I know that this person isn't coming back. Now what do I do? And I think, and I think everybody knows this, it's really hard to pull yourself out of a dark place. A lot of times people need help, so there's no shame in that game. If you're in a dark place and dealing with the loss of a loved one, dealing with a death, it's okay to ask for help. It's okay to seek professional help, to find somebody that you feel comfortable talking to in order to move past that. Sometimes we need a village. Sometimes we need just like I was saying, like I have people that check up on me, some unintentionally, some intentionally. Like, we need that village sometimes to pull us out of our dark place, and it's okay to ask for help. Now, depression, when dealing with a breakup, with the loss of a partner or connection, it feels very much the same way. I would say. I think, if anything, I think you feel the same feelings. You can still behave the same way. You feel despair. You don't want to go out. You don't want to get out of bed. You don't want to eat. All you want to do is sleep. You don't want to socialize. You don't want to work out. You don't want to do any of the things that you do that make you feel happy. And I think that part of depression is still true when you are dealing with a breakup. I think, for me, having had my share of breakups, having been in really dark places and having to pull myself out of those really dark places on my own, I would say, I think this is really where perseverance comes in, and you have to kind of zoom out and look at the bigger picture. That is what has always helped me pull myself out of a dark place, is kind of just being like, okay, well, this happened, and I can't let it determine my whole life. I can't let it change my whole life. I have to get out of this. I have to keep going. I have to keep living. I have to keep doing the things that I need to do, and one day it's not going to be as bad. So this is where, I've talked a lot about perseverance in the last few weeks. I even talked about it last week a little bit. And I talked about this, right? I said that perseverance, I had picked it originally as my word of the year, and then I decided that I didn't like it because it had a negative connotation, because when I see that word, it reminds me of all the pain in my life that I've had to persevere through. And this is what I'm talking about. It's like this kind of stuff, right? When I've had to pull myself out of deep, dark holes, it was my perseverance that pulled me through. And so when I was seeing that word on my bathroom mirror every morning and every night, it's kind of like a trigger for me to be reminded of all the pain. But perseverance is super important, and it has gotten me through those dark times in my life. And so I think, for me personally, I think that is how you can kind of pull yourself out of this. And obviously, if you can't pull yourself out of it, you don't have that perseverance or the will to do that, and you're just feeling really stuck, the same rule applies as when you're dealing with the death. talk to someone. Get professional help if you need to. Number 5, when dealing with a death, the 5th stage of grief, y'all, is acceptance. Acceptance does not mean that you're okay with your loved one being gone, but it's just the fact that you now accept the reality of your life. The example that the article uses, they use a couple examples which I think are really good, but it's like accepting a widow, accepting like, I'm a widow, I live alone. A sibling accepting like, I can no longer call up my siblings. A child, I cannot call my parents anymore. For me, I cannot call my grandmother anymore. I can't call my nanny anymore. Her death was probably the death that has affected me most largely in my life to date. But it's kind of accepting that you don't have that anymore. And I think, you know, for a long time for me, when my nanny died, and gosh, sometimes I still, and that's what I meant when I started this episode and I said it's not linear. Sometimes I'll have those deja vu moments where I still feel like she's gonna call and I'm gonna answer the phone. Or I can pick up the phone and call and talk to her, you know, because she lived in Canada. And so, but we would talk all the time. So I still have those moments, and it's gonna be 8 years in March since she's been gone. But, you know, I still have those moments, but you know, you accept it. You accept this person. I can't talk to this person every week anymore. You know, I can't go to this person for advice anymore. I can't hear the stories from this person anymore. But so you get to a place where you accept those things. And just like this article is saying, and what I just said, acceptance isn't the end of grief. And you may have little moments of acceptance over time. One of the things that this article mentions is a lot of times when people are in the acceptance stage, you know, they'll ask, like, when dealing with a death, you know, like, when will the grief be over? And I thought this was really insightful, but this person in the article stated, you know, how long is the person going to be dead for? Because the likeliness is when we lose a loved one to death, we will have to deal with that death and grieve that death for the rest of our lives. And I think that's kind of what I am seeing now, being 8 years down the road from my grandmother passing away. You know, it's kind of like it comes in waves. Sometimes I don't even think about it and I know she's not in this world anymore. And sometimes it's like whoosh and it just washes over me. So I think that is, you know, interesting. So acceptance when we're dealing with a lost relationship. I think you kind of get to that point where it's like, you know, that the person isn't coming back anymore. And you know that the relationship's over and you're okay with it. You're like, okay, this is done. It's not happening and I need to move on. And acceptance can look different for everyone, just like it can when dealing with a death. I mean, acceptance for some people could be like getting back on the horse. God, I used to say that for years. And I still say it because I still put stock in it. But I used to tell people all the time, like, the best way to get over someone is to get under someone else. Not very healthy, but there is some truth to that, okay? Tried and true. There is some truth to that. But, you know, for some people it could be that. For some people it could be putting themselves out there again. For most people, a lot of people, it's a period of self-love and self-rediscovery, figuring out what you like again, trying to get back into your routines without having this person in your life, figuring out what your new routine looks like, what your new day-to-day looks like. You know, that could be how you're accepting it and how you're moving on and putting your best foot forward. So, knowing that, I would like to move on to talk about the differences between grieving a death and a relationship in a more deep way, in a more insightful way, And I found this great article, or it was maybe like a blog post written by Shelby Forsythia. And she is a grief guide, author, and podcast host. Hey, Shelby. She's got her own little Life After Loss Academy. She's written books on this. She speaks on this. And she has, I think, 2 or 3 different podcasts all dealing with loss and grief. So check her out. Like I said, I'll have this blog post of hers linked on timepasspodcast.com if you are interested or struggling with grief. I think Shelby would be a fantastic person for you to dig into and maybe listen to some of her episodes. But Shelby pointed out some really important things here about the differences, really stark differences between when you deal with death and when you deal with the loss of a relationship. And the biggest one is death is dealing with the loss of someone's physical existence. You know, so the people who die are dead and they're gone. But when you break up with someone, those people are still living. And that is what she describes, quote unquote, as the heartbreaking difference between a death and a breakup. And this is true because when it comes to death, there's no choice. We have no control over it. We don't get to say, this isn't working out for us. Or like, hey, you can't do that yet. I still want to work on this. No, we can't say that. When it comes to death, we have no choice. But when it comes to a relationship, it is a choice. And whatever the circumstances they are, it's basically an active decision made by one person, or hopefully both people, but most of the time it's an active decision made by one person saying that they no longer want to spend time with you. They no longer want to invest in you. They no longer want to do life with you, as she puts it. And this is what she says, and I agreed so much with her. But she says the hardest part of a breakup is not the fact that somebody doesn't want to be in a relationship with you and that the relationship is over, but it's the part where you have to watch them keep living without you. It's true. It's sad. That's why a lot of times we say things like, don't watch your ex on social media, like don't try to do that, because those things make us sad and they keep us in those stages of grief and depression. And it is really a hard part to have somebody be a part of your life and then all of a sudden they're not. And now you have to watch them live their lives without you. It's like that famous quote that we see all the time. It's like, oh, well, we did all that just to become strangers again. It's like all of a sudden you're no longer in this person's life, yet you get to see them moving on and doing things, and you're no longer a part of that. And that is so heartbreaking. Shelby, girl, I agree. Okay, so this is important. This is another difference between dealing with death and dealing with a relationship. So Shelby says that with death, we mourn the future, right? So everything that we had planned, that we thought was going to happen, death came in and shit all over our plans, and now none of that stuff is going to happen. But with a breakup, not only do you mourn the future plans that maybe you had thought of in your head, or maybe you and this person had talked about, but then you get to watch this person maybe do those things or create a new future without you. And all those dreams and plans and hopes and desires are still alive in you, and you still remember it, but it's no longer your reality. But yet, here's your ex, and this person's still alive and doing all these things, and you're still alive and doing all these things, but you're not doing it together. I don't know. Another thing that Shelby points out is that with death, you get to hold on to your fantasies of what the future looks like. It's like, you know, you have those memories of what everything was like, and then what the word she uses is it's like time has stopped, right? Because no other memories are being made with this person. This person's gone. They're dead. You can't make more memories with them. You only have the memories you have to hold on to. But with an ex, it's because they're living, it's like all your fantasies and dreams and hopes that you had, they slowly start crumbling and get dismantled, as Shelby puts it, because you and your ex are still living in this world, and you both still exist, but your future with them no longer exists, and now there's a brand new reality that has taken place from what you used to know. And then again, Shelby says, you know, the biggest difference between death and a breakup is that in the breakup, you and the person have consciously chosen to be apart, and this is a really big point, that's why I took note of it, but she says what that means is you get to watch them grow, change, flounder, thrive, and exist without you. And the way she puts it is that in itself is a pain worth grieving. And it is, you know, a lot of times we say, like, how could he do this to me and continue living his life like nothing happened? It's like when somebody breaks up with us, or when we're mourning the loss of a love connection, it's like when you're in that grief, those stages of grief, right? You're like, oh my God, well, why am I like this? And this person is just off living their life like nothing happened. Did I even matter to them? Do I even matter to them? Like, how can this be? And it's so heartbreaking, y'all. It really is heartbreaking. And Shelby goes on in the article, or her blog post, whatever it is, guys. I'm calling it an article, I'm calling it a blog post. It's more of a blog post. But she goes on and she says that society tells us that death is worse than a breakup, because society says, well, at least they're still alive, you know? But what Shelby says is that both death and a breakup hurt like hell in many different ways. And this is a interesting quote that she says, and I wrote it down for a reason, because she said, them just being alive gives us new things to grieve. It's sad, right? Like, I think a lot of times breakups, we all get pushed, right? It's like, why are you, it's like I was saying, like when we start looking at people's social media or things like that, or checking up on them or thinking of them, or rereading old text messages, looking at their photos, whatever it is, a lot of times our friends, people that care about us, is like, why are you doing that? Like, you're just hurting yourself. Why are you doing that? Stop it. But it's a different kind of loss, and it's a different kind of heartbreak, and people do those behaviors because they're grieving. They don't know how else to process it. And so it's kind of part of their grieving process. And although oftentimes, myself included, when a friend goes through a breakup, I'm always like, oh, you're better off anyway. I try to hype them up, right? I'm like the best hype woman. I'm like, you're better off anyway. They were X, Y, and Z, and you're A, B, and C, and so much better than them. But that's not really sometimes what that person wants to hear. Sometimes they just want to be able to grieve and not be judged for it. So I think, Shelby says it actually in her blog post, but she says, you know, we need to be a little more softer and a little more understanding of people when they're going through breakups, and just not automatically want to slap them around and get them to snap out of it. it is a loss, and with any sort of loss can come grief. So let them grieve with it, and like I always say, like, it's okay. Like when I have to deal with something and I sit and I drink my bourbon and I listen to my music and I just read, that's me grieving and trying to process it. And that's okay. If I want to have a day when I want to sit in my pajamas and just read and do whatever the hell I want and not move off my couch, that's fine. I just can't stay there. So I think that's the big difference, right? Like, people are allowed to grieve how they want to grieve, and so are your friends and loved ones when they're dealing with a breakup. And it's okay to just be there and listen to them as they're dealing with this loss. And don't put such an emphasis right away on moving on until you see that they are in a downward spiral or there's no forward movement. Then they probably need a kick in their pants, or they need somebody to talk to about how they can move on, or they need to talk to a professional. So just have a little more compassion with people who are dealing with a breakup, as you would with somebody who's dealing with the loss of a loved one. You wouldn't tell them to get over it until a certain amount of time had passed by, maybe. So try to deal with it the same way when it comes to breakups. I don't know, you guys. This was an interesting episode for me and an interesting theme between the death in my family that everybody's dealing with, myself included, and just past breakups that I've gone through and how I've dealt with things and lost connections. I really wanted to make the connections on how they're similar, but then I also really wanted to point out how they're different. And I really think Shelby does a great job of illustrating how the loss of a breakup is, it is just as impactful on a person as the loss of a loved one to death. Because however we process this loss and what happens, if we don't process it properly, or we force ourselves to process it too fast, or to put it in the vault and not process it at all, then that's going to come out in our next relationships, right? I always say this, but hurt people hurt people. You got to give yourself time to process things and get over things and be sad about it, be angry about it, be depressed about it, and then accept it and move on. What do you guys think? How do you deal with grief? Whether it be loss of a loved one or loss of a relationship. Let me know. Shoot me a DM, write me an email, timepasspodcast@gmail.com. That's all I've got for you guys today. If you haven't done so already, please like me on Facebook at timepasspodcast. Follow me on Instagram at timepass_podcast. And make sure to like, follow, and subscribe on YouTube. If you are listening to the Time Pass podcast, if you are finding us on a podcast hosting site on Ruckus Avenue Radio, hopefully soon, do me a favor. If you like listening to the show, you're a time passer, please share this episode with at least one other person. You may know somebody who is dealing with the loss of a loved one to death, or the loss of a loved one to a breakup. Maybe this episode can help them deal with their grief, process their grief, realize that they're not alone, and this is normal, and people go through these stages, and it's okay for them to go through these stages as well. All right, you guys, stay authentic in everything you do. Feel your feels, stay authentic to them. I will see you next time.